Welcome! Today, I will show you a selection of really cool historical photographs. Real shots, without staging. Let's go! On May 7, 1931, Belgian physicist Auguste Piccard and Paul Kipfer rode this balloon into the stratosphere and set a new altitude record, 15,781 meters. That flight proved humans could survive extreme height inside a sealed cabin. Tokyo, 1960. Helmeted riot police crash into a dense student crowd during the mass protests led by Zengakuren. The movement targeted the United States-Japan Security Treaty. This is the cargo ship Pyotr Vasev after it rammed the passenger liner Admiral Nakimov near Novorossiysk on August 31, 1986. The liner sank fast, killing 423 people in one of the deadliest peacetime ship disasters in Soviet history. Moscow, March 1994. Police detain racketeers accused of extorting protection money from arcade machine owners. The photo captures the raw post-Soviet protection racket era, with suspects lined up against the wall at gunpoint. Cambodia, 1978. A numbered prison photograph of a detainee under the Khmer Rouge, a regime that hunted educated people as enemies. In just a few years, up to 1.5 million Cambodians died from executions, starvation, and forced labor. Memorial Day 1945 at La Combe Cemetery in France. Teen Hélène Chapelle and her mother kneel at the grave of James Simonian, killed in the Normandy invasion, as she reads a letter from his mother at the exact spot her son was buried. During World War I, a German bullet hit 17-year-old English soldier Leonard Knight's pocket Bible and stopped before reaching his body, tearing through almost all the pages. The book still holds the crushed bullet like a time-stamped piece of battlefield luck. During the Navajo Long Walk in 1864, families were forced to march hundreds of miles to Bosque Redondo while starving and exhausted under armed guard. Navajo women hid sacred ceremonial bundles under their clothing, protecting their spiritual life even as their world was being dismantled. Baldwin Hills Dam in Los Angeles collapsed on December 14, 1963, ripping a huge gap in the wall and sending a violent flood through nearby neighborhoods. The disaster killed 5 people and destroyed hundreds of homes. Amsterdam, April 30, 1980. No housing, no coronation. Riots explode as thousands protest the housing crisis and the Dutch monarchy during Queen Beatrix's inauguration. The city center turns into street battles with smoke, flying debris. October 10, 1941. Captured Soviet soldier M.S. Krutov wrote a final note from captivity, begging his countrymen to remember those who fought to the end through hunger, abuse, and humiliation. The message was later recovered by search volunteers near Vyazma and kept as a rare. July 1941, Operation Barbarossa. Riders from the Waffen-SS Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler speed a tuned-up motorcycle with sidecar through the wreckage of a Soviet village still burning behind them. August-September 1941. A German aircraft photographs the Dnipro hydroelectric station dam after the blast tore a gap through it, turning the reservoir into a raging spill. The destruction unleashed a deadly flood downstream and wiped out crossings. Belle Starr, Myra Maybelle Shirley, later branded the Bandit Queen, was a notorious outlaw figure tied by reputation and associates to the James Younger Circle in Indian Territory. She was killed by a shotgun ambush in 1889. 1916, a German medic marked with the Red Cross sits with a mortally wounded soldier on an open battlefield, staying at his side as the end comes. Behind them, stretcher bearers and a field aid post wait. December 7, 1941, the Honolulu Star Bulletin Extra screams, Oahu bombed by Japanese planes, breaking the Pearl Harbor attack to the islands in real time. This headline marks the moment the United States was dragged into World War II overnight. Arkansas, 1995. White supremacist terrorist Richard Snell speaks at a clemency hearing just before his execution. He claimed there would be a bombing on his execution day, And hours later, the Oklahoma City bombing hit the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. During his 1959 visit to the United States, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev toured an Iowa farm and proudly held up an ear of corn like a trophy. The trip fed his obsession with cornifying Soviet agriculture, one of the strangest Cold War policy fads to ever shape a superpower. Kuwait, 1991. Hungarian engineers bolted two MiG-21 jet engines onto an old T-34 tank to build Big Wind, a firefighting monster for burning oil wells. The engines blasted a hurricane of air, often with water mist, that could smother flames in seconds, sometimes with a single hit. Malta, 1921. The Royal Navy lit up an entire fleet in Grand Harbor as a glowing nighttime salute for the visiting Japanese Crown Prince Hirohito. The warships became floating outlines of light, pure naval spectacles staged to impress a future emperor. 1941, Milford, Connecticut. Photographer Nina Lean captures members of the Young Women's Republican Club in a tight circle, exhaling cigarette smoke over a hand of cards. 1991, Donald Trump is photographed backstage at John Casablancas' Elite Look of the Year, standing with teenage models during the contest. It's a snapshot of the moment high-fashion scouting and New York celebrity power mixed in the same room. 1947, Hollywood stunt legend and air racer Paul Mantz poses at the controls of a Bell 47B, one of the first helicopters to make rotary flight look practical. The crate marked "Helicopter by Paul Mantz" shows how new the idea still was. He was literally delivering the future by air. April 26, 1945, staff officers from the 1st Hermann Göring Panzer Parachute Division walk past a wrecked armored vehicle in the Kleinvelka suburb of Bautzen as smashed roofs and blasted walls show how brutal the street fighting was. 1942, BMW workers hoist massive BMW 801 radial engines in a final assembly hall, the power plants that drove the Focke-Wulf FW-190 and other German aircraft. Each engine was a dense bundle of cylinders, gears, and plumbing. Colonel General Eugen Ritter von Schobert sits with his Wehrmacht staff on the Eastern Front during the opening months of Operation Barbarossa, summer 1941, when he was commanding the German 11th Army. August 18, 1977. Elvis Presley's funeral procession moves through Memphis, with the hearse escorted by police motorcycles and followed by a mile-long line of cars. Thousands of fans pack the sidewalks to watch him head toward Forest Hill Cemetery. 1977. Radio Shack debuts the TRS-80, one of the first mass-market home computers, priced under $600 and sold right from ordinary storefronts. Programs and data were saved on audio cassette tapes, the same kind used for music. 1964. An American airstream from Wally Byam's Caravan to Moscow sits in Red Square beneath St. Basil's, one of the strangest Cold War scenes ever photographed. Dozens of U.S. travelers drove thousands of miles into the Soviet Union on a tightly controlled. England, 1920. A stunt driver launches an open-top car off a ramp at an auto exhibition, using pure showmanship to prove early cars could take a beating. No seatbelts, no roll cage, just a man, a steering wheel, and a crowd betting the suspension survives the landing. 1980. Kurdish women fighters raise rifles in a street rally, turning a crowd scene into a blunt statement of armed resistance. The photo was taken by Michel Setbaun, capturing a rarely seen front line of a long Kurdish insurgency. Boston, 1920s. A city fire engine with exposed plumbing and a massive pump sits half buried in snow, running chains on its wheels for traction. Winter fires were a nightmare. Narrow streets, deep drifts, and heavy equipment that still had to reach the hydrant fast. 1943. Soviet sniper Liza Mironova lies behind a low stone wall, using the rocks and brush as a hide while she sights down her rifle. The USSR fielded thousands of female snipers in World War II. This is what that reality looked like up close. May 24, 1988. Taka Flight 110, a Boeing 737, lost both engines in a violent storm and dead-sticked onto a grassy levee in New Orleans like a giant glider. All 45 people survived, and the jet was later repaired. Batumi, Georgian SSR, 1942. Soviet troops drilled bayonet fighting, practicing lunges and parries with padded masks and quilted jackets. In the middle of World War II, this brutal close combat training was treated as a life-or-death skill, not a sport. March 19, 1945, south of Honshu. USS Essex cruises with the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis as anti-aircraft bursts punch the sky. In the foreground, a Japanese A6M-0, shot down by the cruiser, slams into the sea in a white geyser. 1945. A worker holds the metal wing from a Nazi eagle emblem, being stripped down and sent to the scrapyard as Third Reich symbols were dismantled. Propaganda architecture was literally melted back into raw metal in the first wave of post-war de-Nazification. December 1945. German POWs study a U.S. re-education booklet titled A Short History of American Democracy, part of the post-war push to replace Nazi indoctrination with civic lessons. After surrender, classrooms and pamphlets became another front line. Late July 1942, a prototype KV-1S, Skorosnoy, the faster KV, climbs a test obstacle during factory trials, showing off the redesign meant to fix the KV's sluggish mobility. The KV-1S cut weight and improved handling. A Princess Diana look-alike contest, where contestants copy her feathered haircut and soft makeup so closely they're literally holding her portrait as the target. It's a snapshot of how fast Diana became a global face, famous enough that strangers could compete to become her mirror. Afghanistan, 1987. Soviet combat engineers detonate a roadside mine from behind an armored vehicle, turning the buried charge into a towering black blast plume. In that war, the road itself was the battlefield. Every kilometer could hide an IED waiting for the next convoy. Early 1900s, the Carlson sisters posed in boxing gloves for a traveling vaudeville act that was billed as Fat Girl Wrestling, one of the era's most popular sideshow attractions. Britain, 1944. Women in a munitions plant weigh precise charges of explosive or naval shells using bench scales like pharmacists, because a few grams could decide whether a gun fires cleanly or fails. World War II turned factory accuracy into frontline firepower. Egypt, 1946. Kids swarm around a Coca-Cola bottle, craning for a sip as the drink makes its post-war leap into new markets. One glass bottle turns into a full-on street spectacle in seconds. Balakna, Nizhny Novgorod region, 1929. A Komsomol worker grips the giant control wheel of a paper-making machine, riding a roaring web of gears and rollers. This was the early Soviet industrial push in one frame. Young labor running heavy machinery that turned pulp into the paper for books, newspapers. Vintage ad for spiked toothpaste in a tube, Scotch or bourbon-flavored, literally promising to put some spirit in your brushing. It's peak mid-century marketing, whiskey taste, no bar needed, and nosy guests left guessing what you keep in the cabinet. A pigeon fitted with a tiny chest-mounted camera rig, an example of the Cold War experiments where birds were used as living drones to snap aerial photos over cities. The whole setup is pure stealth engineering. Lightweight harness, micro camera. Manchester, August 1970. A woman is strapped into an early slimming machine with electrodes and belts meant to vibrate or electrically stimulate muscles as a shortcut to exercise. It's the era's no-gym promise in one photo. Technology sold as willpower. Tibet, around 1920. Women wear oversized looped braids that frame the head like a living halo, a regional style built from heavy hair extensions and careful wrapping. In one shot, you get everything at once: traditional dress, a baby carried on the back. Königsberg Airfield, 1932, a Soviet ANT-9 airliner, registration URSS D308, wears the markings of Deruluft, the joint Soviet-German airline that ran regular international routes between the USSR and Germany. Manston, Kent, 2nd August 1943. The crew of the B-26C Marauder Miss Emily poses on their bomber after a mission, with the fuselage torn open by flak near the cockpit. The cartoon nose art looks almost absurd next to the jagged shrapnel damage. 1920s, a homemade moonshine still, big boiler pot, long wooden cooling trough, and improvised fittings, set up right in a snowy courtyard. It's DIY chemistry for illegal booze, built from whatever metal and timber you could get your hands on. 1969, a candid photo shoot captures a college-age woman by the water, years before she entered U.S. politics and public life. It's the rare before the spotlight moment. Casual clothes, no press, just a camera and a summer shoreline. Angolan Civil War, 1970s. A Soviet military advisor drills Angolan fighters in hand-to-hand combat, turning ideology into practical battlefield training. It's Cold War proxy warfare in one frame, foreign instructors, local troops. Moscow, 23 August 1939. The Soviet leader is photographed smiling shortly after the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact was signed, a deal that secretly carved Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Within days, World War II exploded into Poland. New York City, September 6, 1927. Crowds packed the street for the premiere of The Jazz Singer, the film that proved synchronized dialogue could sell tickets. That night, Hollywood's silent era effectively got its death sentence. 1925. Britain's R-33 airship limps along after clipping its mooring mast, the torn nose fabric hanging like a ripped sail. Even damaged, the giant Rigid could stay airborne, proof of how tough these early airships were when everything didn't go to plan. Minsk, 1946. A shop counter stacked with U.S. relief food, cans and packages labeled in English, shows how much post-war Belarus depended on foreign aid to fill shelves. For many shoppers, the labels alone were proof the goods came from a different world. Dhaka, Bengal, British India, 1900. A massive elephant parade rolls down an open road, with rows of tuskers packed so tight they look like a moving wall. For colonial-era pageantry, elephants weren't just transport, they were power on display. Wales, around 1912, coal miners still coated in pit grime crowd a pub with heavy mugs of ale, taking the first real breath after a shift underground. The soot-black faces aren't a filter, it's the coal dust that followed them everywhere, even to their beer. Tehran, 1979. A revolutionary activist leans into traffic to hand an anti-Shah manifesto straight through a car window. Street politics delivered at arm's length. In the Iranian Revolution, leaflets like this were the fast internet. A few pages could pull strangers into the same uprising. Attica Correctional Facility, New York, 1971. Incarcerated men raise fists in the yard during the uprising that turned a state prison into a national flashpoint over living conditions and rights. The standoff ended 4 days later when authorities retook the prison in a deadly assault. Riga, Latvia, 1991. Stacks of Jewish religious books lie packed into the attic of the city's last synagogue, hidden away like a time capsule. When they were uncovered, the dust and cramped space told the story. Someone had protected an entire library by making it invisible. Kuwait, 1991. U.S. Marines ride past the Bergen oil fields as hundreds of sabotaged wells burn, turning daylight into a black storm. The fires were part of Iraq's retreat strategy, an environmental disaster so vast it was visible from space. During a stormy tow in the early 1990s, the towing line snapped and the crew couldn't reconnect it, so they were airlifted off and the liner was left to drift unmanned. It eventually ran aground on the Canary Islands and later broke apart on the rocks. Sarajevo, 1994. During the siege, Zitra Olympic Hall's grounds were turned into a wartime cemetery. Rows of crosses and markers for Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs buried while the city was still under fire. An Olympic venue built for sport became emergency ground for the dead. New York, 1970s. A graveyard of stolen cars is dumped under the FDR Drive, stacked into twisted layers like scrap metal geology. It's the raw, lawless side of the city's crisis years, when a highway underpass could become an unofficial junkyard overnight. Vietnam, around 1980. A farmer rows through a green, weed-choked pond, while the broken tail section of a U.S. B-52 bomber sits like a rusting monument behind him. War wreckage became part of the landscape, metal relics in the middle of everyday food-growing water. Tsavo, Kenya, 1950s. An aerial view shows a massive elephant herd spread across the plain like moving punctuation. Hundreds of bodies walking in loose lines and clusters. It's a rare scale shot of Tsavo before heavy poaching. 1931. American Hercules. Ken Murray poses on a beach, casually stacking 3 women in matching swimsuits like a human weight set. It's pure early Hollywood strongman publicity, muscle, stunts, and a camera selling the idea that strength was entertainment. Prisoners stand in formation during roll call at Sachsenhausen concentration camp in Oranienburg, February 1941. The walls carry SS virtue slogans from Heinrich Himmler's quote, claiming obedience and self-sacrifice lead to freedom. Fresno college students tried to set a world record by stacking 73 people on a single bed in Fresno, California, May 17, 1961. The attempt collapsed the moment 5 girls climbed onto the pile, turning the record into a chaotic human avalanche caught by an AP photographer. April 1945, a former Buchenwald concentration camp guard sits in a cell, still giving the Nazi salute even after capture. The triangle prisoner badge and identification number pinned to his jacket show the power reversal, an ex-perpetrator stamped, evidence from the Lincoln assassination, John Wilkes Booth's boots from the night he shot the president, plus pistols and knives seized from people tied to his conspiracy, including the bullet removed from Lincoln's head. Venice Beach, California, 1929. A bathing suit inspector literally measures women's swimsuits on the sand to enforce public decency rules. 1 inch too short could mean a warning, a fine, or being ordered off the beach. A U.S. spaceflight-tested chimpanzee gets an apple as a post-mission reward inside the recovery capsule, 1961. These primate flights were used to prove life support systems and that a living passenger could survive launch. Weightlessness? Berlin, April 29, 1945. Soviet gunners brace a BM-13 Katyusha rocket launcher for a salvo as the battle for the city hits its final days. Each launch fired a screaming ripple of rockets in seconds, designed to smash wide areas and overwhelm defenders with shock and noise. 1959. Fidel Castro takes a bite of a hot dog during a visit to the New York Zoological Park, just weeks after coming to power in Cuba. It's a surreal Cold War snapshot, one of the world's newest revolutionary leaders, caught in a pure slice of everyday American culture. At a 1964 auto show, Ford rolled out Freddie Ford, a talking promotional robot built to stop crowds and sell the future. With a control panel chest and loudspeaker-style body, it's pure mid-century techno-optimism. Robots as showroom hype, long before real AI. 1910. Kaiser Wilhelm II rides beside former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt during German military maneuvers. It's a rare pre-World War I snapshot of 2 celebrity power figures, Germany's flamboyant emperor and America's globe-touring ex-president. Germany, 1932. A massive line snakes down the sidewalk for cheap meat as the Great Depression crushes wages and jobs. Photos like this show how basic food became a rationed-looking luxury, fuel for the political panic of the last years of the Weimar Republic. 1940s. A German Faust Patrone, early Panzerfaust-style anti-tank launcher, is strapped onto a donkey as an improvised mobile weapon. It's a brutal snapshot of late-war reality, high-tech anti-armor firepower bolted to a pack animal when vehicles, fuel. Winter 1918, in exile. Nicholas II watches as his eldest daughter Olga chops firewood outside their fenced residence. The former imperial family had been reduced to manual chores and strict guard control just months before their execution later that year. A teenage Hungarian freedom fighter walks through the wreckage of Budapest during the 1956 revolution, a street uprising against Soviet control and the communist government. Within weeks, Soviet forces returned with tanks and troops to crush the revolt. Little Rock, Arkansas, 1957. Two black students walk to school as a hostile crowd of white classmates closes in, jeering and threatening them for integrating a previously all-white system. This is what desegregation looked like on the street. Courage under pressure. Paris, 1944. A Free French soldier drags a wounded civilian to safety after gunfire erupts from hidden German holdouts as crowds celebrate the liberation. The photo freezes the brutal whiplash of that day. Victory chants on one street, sudden sniper shots, and blood on the next. Gavrilo Princip's parents stand outside their rough stone home in Bosnia in the 1910s-1920s, a stark look at the poverty he came from. Their son would assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, one pistol shot that helped ignite World War I. This is one of the last known photos of Buffalo Bill Cody, taken just days before his death in January 1917. The aging Wild West icon stands bundled in an overcoat and hat, an end-of-era image of the man who turned frontier life into a global stage show. A woman soldier of the Albanian People's Army sights a mortar, part of the armed forces of the People's Republic of Albania, 1946-1991. The image captures the regime's push for mass militarization, training citizens, including women, for a permanently ready-for-war state. Moscow, 1958. The street outside the U.S. Embassy is littered with fallen banners after a Soviet-organized protest against the U.S. landing troops in Lebanon during the 1958 Lebanon crisis. Petrograd, August 2, 1914. Crowds pack Palace Square waiting for Nicholas II's manifesto announcing Russia's entry into World War I. The banners screaming, "Victory to Russia," capture the first wave of war fever. Paris, August 1944. French resistance fighters and police march a captured German officer across the square in front of the opera, surrounded by cheering locals. In the chaos of liberation, these street-level arrests and escorts turned defeat into a public spectacle. Nurse Anna Yushkevich feeds a wounded Red Navy sailor, V.A. Ukov, at the Leningrad Naval Hospital. In a war where infection, hunger, and cold killed as surely as bullets, this quiet bedside moment was frontline work in its purest form. 1944, likely Moldova. An Orthodox priest raises the cross to bless a marching column of Red Army soldiers and officers. After years of harsh Soviet anti-religious policy, wartime reality forced a shift. Priests reappeared in public as morale. Panmunjom, 1956. A U.S. soldier poses between two North Korean soldiers on the military demarcation line created after the Korean War armistice. The smiles hide the reality. This thin strip became one of the most tense borders on Earth, with the war paused, not ended. Tacoma, Washington, 1919. The Darling Saxophone Four, aka the Four Harmony Maids, pose with a full family of saxophones, including a massive bass sax that looks like industrial plumbing. The instrument itself was patented in 1846 by Belgian maker Adolphe Sax. Georgia, around 1850. An enslaved family stands in a cotton field beside baskets of picked cotton, a whole life framed as forced labor. Children were not spared. On southern plantations, they were treated as property and future profit. World War I ended at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, when the armistice took effect. This street celebration captures the instant 4 years of industrial slaughter finally stopped. During the Belfast Blitz in 1941, officials ordered Belfast Zoo to kill 33 animals in case bombing let them escape into the city. One exception was Sheila, a baby elephant, quietly walked to a North Belfast backyard each night and hidden by zookeeper Denise Weston Austin. Australian geologist Douglas Mawson's 1912-1913 Antarctic sled journey turned into a solo survival epic after Belgrave Ninnis vanished into a crevasse, and Xavier Mertz died weeks later. Mawson hauled himself back for more than a month through storms and starvation. Before moving on to the next frame, please write in the comments which photo you liked the most and why. Let's keep moving forward. Peru's 1970 Ancash earthquake triggered a massive rock and ice avalanche off Mount Huascaran that erased the town of Yungay in minutes, killing around 20,000 people. The mountain had already unleashed deadly slides years earlier. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, launched by Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933, put about 3 million young men to work building trails, fighting erosion, and upgrading parks during the Great Depression. They planted roughly 3 billion trees. In most of the American South, enslaved people were banned from drumming because rhythm could carry coded messages. But in New Orleans, they were still allowed to gather on Sundays at Congo Square to sing, dance, and play African-derived percussion. Preston Tucker's Tiger was a pre-World War II prototype armored car, often mislabeled a tank, tested by the U.S. Army at Aberdeen in 1938, built around a V-12 and an aircraft-style 37mm turret. It's famous for the wild too fast legend, but it wasn't adopted mainly because it performed poorly off-road. Nobuo Fujita was the only Japanese pilot to bomb the U.S. mainland in World War II, dropping incendiaries near Brookings, Oregon in 1942. When the town invited him back in 1962, he gifted a centuries-old family samurai sword as a public act of reconciliation. In 1911, President William Howard Taft's prized cow, Pauline Wayne, vanished for 2 days after a dairy show when her rail car was mistakenly hooked to a cattle train bound for the Chicago stockyards. She was found and brought back before she could be slaughtered. In World War II, the Soviet Union deployed anti-tank dogs, trained to run under enemy tanks with explosives strapped to them. The program was notorious for chaos. Some animals panicked, ran back, and caused deadly accidents on their own side. Detroit, 1930s. A baby fell from a high window and landed on passerby Joseph Figlock. Both survived. About a year later, the same baby fell from the same window onto the same man, and they both lived again. Henry Moseley, who proved atomic number is the true ID of each element, enlisted in World War I and was killed at Gallipoli in 1915 at just 27. His death became a textbook warning. Britain later moved to keep top scientists out of frontline combat. In 1896, London driver Walter Arnold got one of the first speeding tickets after hitting about 8 miles per hour in a 2 miles per hour zone. A police officer chased him down on a bicycle and fined him 1 shilling. Mafia figure Gregory Scarpa later claimed he helped investigators during the 1964 Mississippi civil rights murder case by extracting information from a Klansman, an infamous story that still gets repeated because it's so dark. U.S. Federal Election Day was set as the Tuesday after the first Monday in November, 1845, partly for 1800s travel. Sunday was for church, Monday for the trip, and Wednesday was often market day. It's a calendar built for horse and wagon America that never got updated. On December 24, 1969, an SR-71 flew to the North Pole to photograph and radar map a Soviet ice station believed to be tracking U.S. submarines. The images showed it was unmanned in winter. The CIA later ran Operation Cold Feet to grab documents there. This photo shows Loretta Lynn's parents, Clara Clary Webb and Ted Webb, in their coal mining home community of Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. Their daughter was born there on April 14, 1932. Backstory for the country legend who sang about poverty and coal country life from the inside. In 1913, 10-year-old Sarah Rector was assigned 160 acres in Oklahoma through a land allotment program, dismissed as worthless ground. Oil was found on it, and the royalties made her one of the first black child millionaires in the United States. On January 5, 1934, Fenway Park was hit by a major fire that tore through parts of the stadium. The damage was repaired in time for baseball to return, but the photos show how close Boston came to losing its iconic ballpark. Hoover Dam was built by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation in about 5 years and finished roughly 2 years ahead of schedule. This photo shows the earliest concrete forms taking shape on the canyon floor, ground zero of one of the biggest engineering projects of the Great Depression. 1903 World Series at Boston's Huntington Avenue grounds. The overflow crowd spills onto the field during Game 3. Pittsburgh beat Boston 7-3 with Deacon Philippe outdueling Cy Young, and Jimmy Sebring hit the first World Series home run. The first known 3D feature film, The Power of Love, 1922, used red and green anaglyph glasses. Viewers could even choose a happy or tragic ending by covering one lens and watching only the red or the green image. From 1912 to 1948, the Olympics awarded medals for art, architecture, literature, music, painting, and sculpture. So the Games once crowned artists like athletes. The Amsterdam Olympic Stadium even won an Olympic gold medal for architecture in 1928. After Chernobyl's 1986 explosion, 3 workers, Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov, waded into flooded rooms to open valves and drain the suppression pools, trying to prevent a feared steam explosion if molten fuel hit the water. The ship's cat sits on the engine order telegraph on the bridge of the U.S. destroyer USS Nicholson, DD-442. Cats were kept on warships to control rats and became unofficial morale officers for crews living in steel corridors. Turkey, September 12, 1980. Tanks roll through empty streets after the army seized power and imposed a nationwide curfew. The coup launched years of military rule, mass arrests, and a rewritten constitution that reshaped Turkish politics for decades. Muhammad Ali playfully takes a jab from Michael Jackson in a boxing ring, 2 global icons in one surreal frame. It's a rare behind-the-scenes moment where the greatest heavyweight of his era lets the king of pop throw hands for fun. Stalingrad, 1947. The city is still a skeleton of burned-out buildings, with a wrecked German tank left in the rubble like a monument. Even 2 years after the war, the battlefield hadn't fully turned back into a city. Philadelphia, August 26, 1981. Mick Jagger faces a pack of cameras at JFK Stadium to announce the Rolling Stones' upcoming U.S. tour. It's the launch moment of their huge early 80s comeback run, with the press pit practically swallowing him. Bahamas Training Camp, November 17, 1981. Muhammad Ali tries to sharpen up for his final fight, a heavyweight title challenge against Trevor Berbick. He lost the bout, and it became the last time Ali fought professionally. Elvis Presley poses in a karate-gi with one of his instructors, showing how seriously he took martial arts. He trained for years and eventually earned a black belt in karate. Kazan Governorate Tsarevo-Kokshaiski Uyezd, 1899 to 1905. Newlyweds pose during a visit to the bride's parents, wearing full traditional rural dress. The bride's heavy headdress, layered jewelry, and embroidered apron make this less a portrait. Red Army soldier Vasily Vataman is pictured with a Panzerfaust. One account credits him with taking out 10 German soldiers using a faulty launcher by turning the weapon itself into a close-quarters tool. It's a brutal example of frontline improvisation when gear fails. Addis Ababa, May 1, 1977. Ethiopian youths march in red communist uniforms with rifles and flags during May Day celebrations under the new Marxist regime. The image captures how the revolution didn't just change politics, it militarized kids. Crete, 1941. 2 German soldiers stage a mock knight's joust on donkeys, turning war downtime into dark comedy. The contrast is jarring, play-acting medieval sport on an island occupied after one of World War II's bloodiest airborne invasions. 1939. A column of Polish POWs is marched past a crashed German Fiesler FJW-156 Storch, a liaison plane built for short takeoffs and landings. The wrecked aircraft beside the prisoners is a blunt snapshot of the invasion's first weeks. Victory on the ground, chaos in the air. October 1944. A German Pa-K-38 anti-tank gun fires through smoke as the crew hugs the ground under return fire. The 50mm Pa-K-38 was deadly early in the war, but by 1944 it was increasingly outgunned by heavier Allied armor. A German sentry post on a railway bridge, sandbags and logs stacked into a tiny bunker guarding the lifeline of trains and supplies. One weak link here could stop an entire front's logistics. Kentucky, 1966. A bookmobile pulls up like an ice cream truck for readers, and one little girl gets to climb aboard first. These rolling libraries brought free books to towns and rural roads that didn't have a library building at all. 1973. Outside the U.S. Supreme Court, activists hold a "Keep Abortion Legal" sign as Roe v. Wade ruled the Constitution protected a right to abortion nationwide. The decision reshaped American politics for decades and became one of the country's most fought-over court rulings. Rome, around 1980. A metro train rolls into the station under harsh fluorescent lights as commuters pour across the platform. The Uscita sign and boxy cars capture the gritty pre-digital era of city transit. Please leave your opinion about the video in the comments. I manually select these historical photos, and I genuinely believe they are very cool. I would love to hear what you think. Thank you, friends. Ben Burtt, Star Wars sound designer, photographed in 1980, surrounded by tape reels and audio gear used to build iconic effects. The lightsaber hum, R2-D2's voice, Darth Vader's breathing, blaster shots, and TIE fighter screams. Austrian circus legend, Katie Sandwina, 1925. One arm locked out as she lifts a full-grown man overhead, smiling like it's a warm-up. This wasn't a staged trick shot. Her act was built on real, repeatable feats that made her a worldwide headline. Port Arthur, 1905, the aftermath of Japanese shelling. A smashed office with desks ripped open, paper and splintered wood blasted across the floor, and the harbor's warships still visible through the haze outside. This is what artillery fire looks like up close. Everyday rooms turned into shrapnel-strewn ruins in seconds. September 1967, during China's Cultural Revolution, Xi Zhongxun is driven through a public humiliation parade surrounded by guards and a packed crowd. The placard names him and brands him a traitor to the party. Punishment delivered as a moving billboard. USSR, October 1970. The wedding party arrives at the registry office in a taxi, the hood decorated with flowers and the couple bundled up for the cold. In the 1970s, personal cars were rare, so a taxi was the practical wedding limousine for getting to the Zags on time. Korean War, 1950-1953. USS New Jersey, BB-62, fires a broadside at North Korean positions. Those white fireballs are its 16-inch main guns going off almost together. Each shell weighs about as much as a small car and can be thrown tens of kilometers inland from the coast. Louvre, 1971. A guard poses beside the Mona Lisa after it was placed behind a heavy protective panel. Security turned into part of the display. By then, the painting had already been targeted enough that just hang it on the wall wasn't an option anymore. Reuben Hurricane Carter in the ring, a fighter who later lost years of his life to a murder conviction he insisted was wrongful and was eventually overturned. He died at 76 after becoming a global symbol of how a single court case can erase a career. 1930s. A young John F. Kennedy sits with his closest friend and college roommate, Lem Billings, during a vacation in the Netherlands. The dog between them was a souvenir of the trip. They bought him together for $7. 1991, Pablo Escobar at his son's 14th birthday, caught by a harsh flash as a dry ice smoking drink fogs the table in front of him. It's a family party snapshot featuring a man who was actively being hunted by the Colombian state at the time. Rome, 1969. An Olympic Stadium crowd made of 50,000 plastic mannequins, built as extras for the film The Games. From a distance, it reads like a packed grandstand. Up close, it's rows of identical faces frozen in applause. New Haven, East Sussex, 5 October 1941. A captured German officer is photographed on the dockside gangway, guarded at close range by a British soldier. The rope tied to the railing and the ship's superstructure behind them placed the scene in a working port, mid-transfer of POWs. Moscow, 1965, after the parade. Mazy 537. Heavy transporters roll along the Kremlin embankment, hauling G-1 missiles, right, and an R-26 on another rig. The show is over. This is the real flex, strategic hardware being driven back through the city in broad daylight. Tasmania, 1869. A portrait of one of the island's last surviving Aboriginal Tasmanians, taken after decades of violent dispossession by British colonists. By the late 1800s, disease, forced removals, and killings had pushed the indigenous population to near erasure. USSR, 1943. Girls wearing the medal for the defense of Leningrad, awarded to civilians who endured the siege and contributed to the city's survival. Childhood in wartime, marked not by toys, by state honors earned under starvation and shelling. A Soviet soldier shaves in a frontline trench using a mirror and a straight razor while a comrade keeps watch behind the parapet. In the dirt beside him, a PPSH-41 with a box magazine, an RG-42 grenade, and an SH-40 helmet, daily routine stacked inches from combat. Dhanbad, Bihar, 1989. Coal miners stare straight into the lens, headscarves wrapped tight, a pickaxe resting on one man's shoulder. This is India's coal belt up close, faces, dust, and the tool that decides whether you eat. Chicago, 1966. Heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali stands in his gym with Johnny Coolin, the 1910-era boxing champion, under a hanging speed bag and walls packed with fight photos. Two generations of champions in one frame, Ali towering over the man who ruled the sport half a century earlier. East London, 1986. Stanley Kubrick walks through the Beckett set of Full Metal Jacket, bombed-out buildings, and rubble built to stand in for Hue, Vietnam, 1968. No jungle, no Asia, just a scarred industrial block in Britain turned into a war zone by production design. Amsterdam, 1948. A civil servant prepares House of Representatives election counts on an IBM 401 by feeding it stacks of punch cards, each hole encoding a vote total for the machine to tabulate. The results come out as printed lines, not pixels. 26 September 1911. Hélène Dutrieux sits in the cockpit of her aircraft, already famous as a Belgian cycling world champion who also raced motorcycles and cars before becoming a pioneer pilot. Later, she served as a wartime ambulance driver and ran a military hospital. Chattanooga, Tennessee, 1905. Three department store workers spend lunch break on the rooftop parapet, gripping their hats against the wind while telegraph wires slice across the sky. Retail girls, one floor above the city, still dressed like it's the sales floor. Belfast, Northern Ireland, May 5, 1981. Three girls walk past Royal Fusiliers soldiers posted to watch for snipers after overnight riots sparked by the death of IRA hunger striker Bobby Sands. By dawn, the street looks normal again. Rifles stay out. London suffragettes salute New Zealand, the first self-governing country to give all women the parliamentary vote. Law signed 19 September 1893, just before that year's election. The UK didn't grant votes to women until 1918 and equal voting rights until 1928, and the US followed with the 19th Amendment in 1920. San Bernardino, 1975. Antonio Rivera sits with his lawyer at a hearing after he and his ex-wife Merla Walpole were accused of murdering their 3-year-old daughter, missing since 1965. 9 months after their arrest, the girl was found alive, already adopted by another family. Zimbabwe, April 1980. Bob Marley is pictured during the independence celebrations in Harare, then Salisbury, where he played Rufaro Stadium and performed Zimbabwe. The first show was hit by tear gas when crowds outside tried to force entry, and he came back to play again the next day. Brooklyn Borough Hall's resident cat Jerry Fox, nearly blind and fitted with custom spectacles, became a newspaper celebrity in the early 1900s. In 1904, he reportedly raised the alarm on a Borough Hall fire, and in April 1905, the New York Times reported his remains were found in a Borough Hall subway shaft. New York City, March 1888. The blizzard of '88. Great white hurricane, buried streets under up to 4 feet, 1.2 meter, of snow and wind-driven drifts that swallowed sidewalks and stopped transport cold. The storm crippled the Northeast for days, snapping telegraph lines and effectively shutting down the city. New Jersey, 1945. 25-year-old WWII Pacific veteran Howard Auld is photographed under arrest for murder after a VJ Day party, seated between 2 police officers shortly after being taken into custody. 1972, North Vietnam, during the Easter Offensive. Jane Fonda is photographed at bomb-damaged sites, part of the trip that ignited the Hanoi Jane controversy. The backlash focused on her anti-war broadcasts and posed images from the visit, including photos with North Vietnamese anti-aircraft guns. New York City, 1902. The Flatiron Building rises at 5th Ave plus Broadway, plus 23rd Saint, one of Manhattan's earliest landmark skyscrapers. Its wedge shape funneled gusts at street level, so notorious for flipping skirts that cops shooed gawkers away, a scene later tied to the slang 23 Skidoo, popular origin story. New York, 1880. Brooklyn Bridge under construction. Workers walking the main cables high above the East River while the deck is still just an open steel skeleton. The bridge would open in 1883, finished under Chief Engineer Washington Roebling after his father, John A. Roebling, died early in the project.